The doorbell rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, just as I was pulling the golden turkey from the oven. What I saw through the peephole made my blood turn to ice. A woman I'd never seen before standing on my front porch with two teenagers, all three of them sharing the same distinctive Thompson nose that I'd inherited from my father. Behind them, my sister Nicole sat in her silver Honda, engine running, her hands gripping the steering wheel like she was preparing for a quick escape. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I'm 34 years old. Until that Thanksgiving afternoon in my colonial home on Maple Street in Millbrook, Connecticut, I thought I knew everything about my family. I was wrong in the most devastating way possible. The morning had started like every Thanksgiving for the past 8 years since Kevin and I bought our house. I was up at dawn, methodically working through my grandmother's handwritten recipes while the autumn sun filtered through my kitchen windows. The dining room table was set for 12, our usual crowd of Kevin and me, our kids Tyler and Chloe, my divorced mother Patricia, my sister Nicole, and a handful of close family friends who'd become part of our tradition over the years. Nicole had called around noon, her voice carrying that strange tension I'd been noticing more frequently over the past few months. "Rachel, I might be a little late today," she'd said, and I could hear the sound of her car door slamming in the background. "I have to pick up someone." "It's complicated," I'd laughed, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while basting the turkey. "Nicole, you always make everything complicated. Just get here when you can. You know Mom gets cranky when we start without the whole family." What I didn't realize was that Nicole was about to redefine what whole family meant. The previous months had been particularly stressful for our family. Dad had been acting strange since late summer, more secretive, taking phone calls in hushed tones and making vague references to financial adjustments that none of us understood. David Thompson had always been the rock of our family, even after the divorce from Mom 15 years ago. He'd maintained close relationships with both Nicole and me, never missing birthdays or holidays, always showing up with his terrible dad jokes and generous spirit. But something had shifted. The man who used to drop by unannounced for Sunday dinners had become elusive. When I'd try to pin him down for specific plans, he'd become vague, mentioning other commitments that he never elaborated on. Nicole, who had always been Dad's favorite and maintained the closest relationship with him, seemed to know something I didn't. Whenever I'd bring up Dad's strange behavior, she'd change the subject or offer some dismissive explanation about work stress. The tension came to a head 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when I discovered that Dad had been struggling financially. Not just struggling, drowning. Kevin had run into Dad's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, at the grocery store, and she'd mentioned in passing that she'd seen a foreclosure notice posted on Dad's front door. When I confronted Nicole about it, she'd been evasive, claiming she'd already offered to help Dad with his mortgage but he'd refused. That night, I'd driven to Dad's small ranch house on the other side of town, my heart racing as I saw the official notice taped to his front door. The house where Nicole and I had spent every other weekend after the divorce, where Dad had taught us to ride bikes in the driveway and hosted elaborate 4th of July barbecues, was about to be taken by the bank. I'd called Dad immediately, my voice shaking with emotion. "Dad, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. Kevin and I have savings." His response had been strange, almost guilty. "Rachel, sweetheart, it's more complicated than you think. There are other people involved, other responsibilities. I can't take money from you kids. Other responsibilities." The phrase had haunted me for weeks. What responsibilities could possibly be more important than keeping the family home? And why did Nicole seem to know something I didn't? Now standing in my hallway with my oven mitts still on, staring at 3 strangers who somehow looked like family, I was about to get answers I never wanted to hear. I opened the door slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The woman was probably in her early 40s, with warm brown eyes and the kind of natural beauty that comes from someone comfortable in their own skin. She was holding hands with the 2 teenagers, a boy who looked about 16 with Dad's stubborn jawline, and a girl around 14 with the same deep-set brown eyes that Nicole and I shared. "Are you Rachel?" the woman asked, her voice carrying a slight Hispanic accent and a nervousness that mirrored my own. I nodded, unable to find words. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez," she continued, glancing back at Nicole's car before meeting my eyes again. "These are my children, Miguel and Sofia. I think we need to talk about your father." The world seemed to tilt sideways. In the background, I could hear Tyler and Chloe playing video games in the living room, completely oblivious to the fact that their grandfather's secret was standing on our doorstep. Kevin was in the garage, probably tinkering with his tools to avoid the pre-dinner chaos. Mom was in the guest bathroom, touching up her makeup before our guests arrived. I don't understand, I managed to say, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. Miguel, the older boy, stepped forward with the kind of awkward bravery that only teenagers possess. Miss Thompson, our dad David Thompson, he told us we have 2 older sisters. Are you one of them? The words hit me like a physical blow. Dad, our dad. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry to do this today, on your holiday. But David had another heart attack yesterday, and he's in intensive care at Bridgeport Hospital. Before the surgery, he made me promise that if anything happened, I would bring the kids to meet you and Nicole. He said it was time you all knew the truth. Another heart attack. Yesterday, and I was just finding out now, from strangers on my doorstep. Behind me I heard footsteps. Kevin appeared at my shoulder, his face instantly shifting from casual curiosity to protective alertness as he took in the scene. Rachel, honey, is everything okay? I turned to look at Nicole's car, and through the windshield, I could see her face, pale, guilt-ridden, and absolutely terrified. She'd known all along. Carmen followed my gaze. Nicole she's been helping David support us for the past 3 years. After she found out about us, she convinced him to tell you, but he was scared. He was ashamed. He never meant for any of this to happen. 3 years. My sister had known about Dad's second family for 3 years, and had said nothing. Not when I was worried about his strange behavior. Not when I was confused about his financial troubles. Not when I'd offered to help with his mortgage, not knowing that his money had been going to support 2 children I didn't even know existed. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Nicole's mysterious work trips that had become more frequent. Her evasiveness whenever I tried to make plans that included Dad. The way she deflected my concerns about his behavior and finances. She hadn't just known about Dad's secret family, she'd been actively helping him hide it from me. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carmen understood immediately. Miguel is 16, Sophia is 14. David and we met 17 years ago when I was working at the community center where he volunteered after your parents' divorce. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was going through my own divorce, and he was lonely. By the time we realized how serious our feelings were, I was pregnant with Miguel. 17 years. Dad had been living a double life for 17 years. And Nicole had been complicit in that deception for 3 of them. Miguel stepped closer, and I could see Dad's gentle nature in his eyes, the same way he used to look at Nicole and me when we were kids. Miss Thompson, our dad talks about you and Nicole all the time. He has pictures of your kids, Tyler and Chloe, on his desk at home. Our home, he corrected himself quickly. He never wanted to hurt anyone, but he loves our mom, and he loves us too. Sophia, who had been silent until now, spoke up with the directness that only teenage girls can manage. He cries sometimes, you know. When he thinks we can't see him. He says he's lived his whole life being torn in half, loving 2 families but never being able to bring them together. The sound of car doors slamming made us all turn. Nicole was finally getting out of her car, moving toward us with the resigned pace of someone walking toward their execution. Her face was streaked with tears, and her usual perfectly styled appearance looked disheveled. Rachel, she called out, her voice breaking. Please let me explain. But I wasn't ready for explanations. I was still processing the fact that I had 2 half-siblings I'd never known about, that my father had been living a secret life for longer than Tyler had been alive, and that my own sister, my only sibling, my closest family member after Kevin and the kids, had been lying to my face for years. Carmen seemed to sense the family storm that was about to break. Maybe we should go, she said quietly, putting protective arms around Miguel and Sophia. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have listened to David. This was your family day, and we've ruined it. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. No, you're not ruining anything. Come inside. If you're Dad's family, then you're part of this too. I stepped back and gestured them into my home, the same home where I'd been preparing a Thanksgiving feast for what I thought was my complete family. Kevin squeezed my shoulder as they passed, his silent support grounding me in a moment when everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Nicole reached the porch just as Carmen and the kids entered the house. She looked at me with desperate eyes. clearly preparing to launch into the explanation she'd been dreading for 3 years. "Before you say anything," I said, holding up my hand to stop her, "I need to know one thing. When I was crying to you about Dad's foreclosure notice, when I was worried sick about his health and his finances, when I offered to help him with money, you knew that money was going to support his other family, didn't you?" Nicole's face crumpled. "Rachel, it's not that simple. It's a yes or no question, Nicole." She nodded miserably. "Yes, I knew. The betrayal hit me like a tsunami. It wasn't just that Dad had kept this secret, it was that Nicole had become his accomplice, watching me suffer and worry, while she held the key to everything I couldn't understand." From inside the house, I could hear Carmen gently explaining to Tyler and Chloe that she and her children were friends of Grandpa David. Kevin was offering them something to drink, his natural hospitality kicking in, even as he processed the same shocking revelations I was struggling with. Mom's voice carried from the kitchen. "Rachel, honey, who's here? Should I put out extra place settings? Extra place settings. For Dad's secret family. On Thanksgiving Day." I looked at Nicole, standing on my porch in her expensive coat and designer boots, her face streaked with guilt and tears. 3 years of lies stretched between us like a chasm.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
3 years of watching me worry and wonder while she held the truth that would have changed everything. "Get in the house," I said quietly. "We're going to sit down, and you're going to tell me everything. Every detail, every lie, every moment you chose Dad's comfort over my right to know the truth about my own family." As we walked into my home together, Nicole, Carmen, Miguel, Sophia and me, I had no idea that this devastating Thanksgiving would ultimately become the day our fractured family finally began to heal. But first there would be reckoning. There would be painful truth. And there would be consequences that none of us were prepared for. The turkey was getting cold, but the real feast was just beginning. A bitter meal of long-hidden secrets that would forever change what it meant to be a Thompson. The sound of chairs scraping against my hardwood floor filled the suddenly too small dining room, as we all found places around the table I'd so carefully set that morning. Carmen sat rigidly between Miguel and Sophia, her hands folded in her lap like she was afraid to touch anything. Nicole had taken the seat farthest from me, positioning herself near the kitchen door as if planning another escape route. Kevin had smoothly handled the introductions with Tyler and Chloe, explaining that these were special guests of Grandpa David's while shooting me meaningful looks that promised we'd talk later. My kids, bless their resilient hearts, had simply accepted the presence of two new teenagers, and were already asking Miguel about his video game preferences. Mom emerged from the guest bathroom with her usual Thanksgiving elegance, then stopped dead in her tracks when she saw our expanded gathering. Patricia Thompson had always prided herself on reading social situations, and I watched her sharp eyes take in Carmen's nervous posture, the family resemblance between the kids and Dad, and Nicole's guilty expression. "Well," Mom said slowly, settling into her usual chair with the careful dignity she'd maintained since her divorce, "this is unexpected." Carmen started to speak, but I held up my hand. There was an order to these revelations, and I needed to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of my grasp. "Mom, these are Carmen, Miguel, and Sofia Rodriguez. They're here because they have something important to tell us about Dad." I turned to face Nicole directly. But first I think Nicole needs to explain exactly how long she's known about this, and why she chose to keep it secret. Nicole's face went pale, but before she could respond, Sophia spoke up with the fearless honesty that only 14-year-olds possess. "Thompson, your sister Nicole saved our family. When our dad got sick the first time 3 years ago, and couldn't work for months, we were going to lose our apartment. Nicole helped him figure out how to keep supporting us without taking money away from you and your mom." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Mom's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down too quickly. Kevin's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight as we processed what Sophia had just revealed. "Sick." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "David was sick 3 years ago." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "He had his first heart attack during Miguel's freshman year of high school. We couldn't afford the medical bills, and David was terrified that if he asked you all for help, you'd find out about us." That's when Nicole discovered the truth. I turned to stare at my sister, feeling like I was seeing a stranger. "How did you find out?" Nicole finally looked up, her voice shaking. "I was at Hartford Hospital visiting a client who'd been in an accident. I saw Dad in the cardiac wing, and when I asked him what was wrong, he broke down. Rachel, he was so scared. Not just about the heart attack, but about losing Carmen and the kids. He'd been trying to support 2 households on his teacher's pension, and it was destroying him financially and emotionally. The revelation that Dad had been a teacher stung in an unexpected way. All these years, I'd wondered why his retirement seemed so modest, why he'd downsized to that small house, why he always seemed to be watching his spending. I'd attributed it to the divorce settlement with Mom, never imagining he was supporting an entire second family. "So you decided to help him hide it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I decided to help him survive it," Nicole shot back, her own anger finally surfacing. "Rachel, you don't understand what it was like. Dad was having panic attacks. He'd lost 15 pounds in 2 months. He was talking about leaving everything and disappearing because he couldn't figure out how to take care of everyone he loved." Miguel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We didn't want his money. Mom worked 2 jobs to try to help, but Dad insisted that we were his responsibility too." Carmen reached across the table and took my hand, surprising me with the gesture. "Your father is a good man, who made complicated choices. When I got pregnant with Miguel, I told David he didn't need to be involved. I never wanted to break up anyone's family, or take anything away from you girls. But he chose to be involved," Mom said quietly, and for the first time since they'd arrived, there was something other than shock in her voice. "That sounds like David." The conversation was interrupted by Tyler bouncing into the room, completely oblivious to the emotional landmine we were all navigating. "Mom, when are we eating? I'm starving," and Miguel says he's never had stuffing before. The innocent comment broke some of the tension, reminding us all that there were children involved who didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of adult secrets and betrayals. Carmen smiled at her son, with the kind of pride that only comes from single mothers who've raised good kids under difficult circumstances. "Miguel's right," she said. "We usually spend Thanksgiving with my sister's family, but David always talks about your amazing cooking, Rachel. He describes every dish in detail every year when he comes home." When he comes home, the phrase hung in the air, highlighting the impossible situation Dad had created for himself. Thanksgiving with us in the afternoon, then driving an hour to Bridgeport to have a second Thanksgiving dinner with his other family. Christmas morning split between 2 sets of children, who didn't know about each other. Birthday parties attended separately, graduations celebrated in shifts. How did he do it? I asked, the logistics suddenly overwhelming me. How did he manage to be present for both families? Nicole looked down at her hands. "He wasn't really present for anyone, Rachel. That's what you never understood about his behavior these past few years. He was constantly stressed, always rushing from one place to another, never able to fully relax anywhere because he was always hiding something." The truth of her words stung, because I had noticed Dad's distraction, his tendency to check his phone constantly, the way he'd sometimes seem physically present but mentally elsewhere. I'd attributed it to aging, maybe some mild depression following his retirement. I'd never imagined he was orchestrating an elaborate double life. Kevin cleared his throat gently. "Maybe we should focus on right now. David's in the hospital, and regardless of how we all got here, we're family. What do we need to do?" Carmen pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "The doctors said the surgery went well, but he's still unconscious. They expect him to wake up sometime tonight or tomorrow morning." I've been going back and forth between the hospital and home, trying to explain to the kids why their dad might not make it home for Thanksgiving. "Our dad," Sophia corrected quietly, looking directly at me. "He's our dad too." The simple statement from this brave teenage girl cut straight through all my anger and confusion. She was right. Whatever mistakes Dad had made, whatever lies had been told, Miguel and Sophia were innocent in all of this. They were also my half-siblings, which made them family, whether I was ready for that reality or not. Mom stood up suddenly, her natural hostess instincts overriding the emotional chaos. "Well then, we need to get some food into everyone before we head to the hospital. Carmen, you and the kids must be hungry, and hospitals have terrible food even on good days." As Mom began orchestrating the serving of dinner with her usual efficiency, I found myself studying Miguel and Sophia more closely. Miguel had Dad's hands, the same long fingers that used to help me with math homework at the kitchen table. Sophia's laugh, when Tyler made a joke about the cranberry sauce, was identical to Nicole's infectious giggle from when we were kids. These weren't just Dad's secret children. They were my siblings, with shared genetics and expressions that created an immediate sense of recognition. The anger I felt toward Dad and Nicole didn't extend to them. But that realization brought its own complications. Nicole helped serve the meal, moving around my kitchen, with the familiarity of someone who'd been part of our family traditions for 34 years. But every time our eyes met, the weight of her deception hung between us like a wall. 3 years of birthdays, holidays, and family dinners, where she'd sat at my table, knowing something that changed everything about our family dynamic. "There's something else," Nicole said quietly as we all began eating. "About Dad's house, the foreclosure notice you saw." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "What about it?" "I've been paying his mortgage for the past 8 months, ever since Carmen lost one of her jobs, and Dad's medical bills from the first heart attack started piling up. That foreclosure notice was old, from before I started helping." Carmen looked mortified. "Nicole, you didn't tell them that part. Tell us what part?" Mom asked, her voice developing the dangerous edge it used to get when Nicole and I were in trouble as kids. Nicole took a deep breath. "I took out a second mortgage on my condo to help Dad keep his house. I've been covering his payment and sending money for Miguel and Sophia's school expenses." The room fell silent except for the sound of Tyler asking Miguel to pass the mashed potatoes. My sister, who I'd always seen as somewhat self-centered and focused on her real estate career, had been quietly sacrificing her own financial security to hold our fractured family together. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Nicole, if you'd explained what was happening, I would have helped. Kevin and I could have contributed. Because Dad made me promise not to," Nicole replied, tears starting to flow again. "He was so ashamed, Rachel. He felt like he'd failed everyone by creating this situation. He was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd hate him. Or worse, that you'd feel obligated to help support Carmen and the kids, and he couldn't live with that burden on you." Miguel looked up from his plate, his teenage directness cutting through the adult complexities. "Our dad talks about you all the time, Rachel. He has pictures of your kids in his wallet, and he knows everything about Tyler's baseball games and Chloe's dance recitals. He never wanted to hurt you, but he couldn't abandon us either." The weight of the situation was beginning to settle on me in a way that went beyond anger or betrayal. Dad hadn't just been living a double life, he'd been slowly destroying himself trying to be everything to everyone while being honest with no one. "How bad is his financial situation?" Kevin asked, his practical nature cutting to the heart of the immediate problem. Carmen and Nicole exchanged glances. "Bad," Carmen admitted. "Even with Nicole's help, we're barely keeping our heads above water." David insisted on paying for Miguel's college prep classes and Sophia's art supplies, but it meant cutting corners everywhere else. Mom set down her fork with deliberation. "Well, that's enough of that nonsense. David Thompson is many things, but he's not going to die broke and stressed because he was too proud to ask his family for help." The casual way Mom included Carmen and the kids as family surprised everyone, including herself. But Patricia Thompson had always been a practical woman, and she'd clearly decided that righteous indignation was less productive than problem solving. "Mrs. Thompson," Carmen started, but Mom waved her off. "It's Patricia, dear, and we're going to figure this out together. All of us." As if summoned by Mom's declaration, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Carmen's face went white as she read her own phone. "He's awake," she whispered. "David's awake and he's asking for all of us." The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure had arrived. It was time to face Dad, to confront the man who'd lived 17 years of lies and see him through the lens of everything I now knew. But as we all began clearing the table and preparing to head to Bridgeport Hospital, I realized that this Thanksgiving had already fundamentally changed our family in ways that went far beyond Dad's deception. Carmen and the kids weren't going anywhere. Nicole's sacrifice had created bonds that couldn't be undone. And somewhere in the chaos of revelations and hurt feelings, we'd all begun the messy process of becoming a real family, complicated, imperfect, but finally honest. The drive to the hospital would give me time to process everything I'd learned and prepare for the conversation that would determine whether the Thompson family could survive the truth that had finally come to light. The fluorescent lights of Bridgeport Hospital's cardiac wing cast everything in an unforgiving glare as our unlikely convoy made its way through the sterile corridors. Carmen walked ahead with the confidence of someone who'd navigated these halls many times over the past few days, while the rest of us followed like awkward tourists in the landscape of Dad's secret life. Miguel and Sophia flanked their mother protectively, their familiarity with this environment a stark reminder of how much of Dad's medical crisis I'd been unaware of. Behind them, Mom walked with the measured pace she'd perfected during her own health scares, while Nicole hovered at the edges of our group like she wasn't sure she deserved to be included in this family pilgrimage. Kevin had stayed home with Tyler and Chloe, promising to handle the dinner cleanup and field any questions about our abrupt departure. The normal rhythms of Thanksgiving evening, leftover turkey sandwiches, football games, and the comfortable lethargy that follows a big meal, felt like they belonged to a different universe entirely. As we approached room 314, Carmen stopped abruptly and turned to face us. Her composure, which had held steady through the revelations at my dinner table, was beginning to crack. "Before we go in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to understand that David has been terrified of this moment for 17 years. He's weak from the surgery, and the medications make him emotional. Please don't." She struggled to find the right words, and I realized she was asking us not to destroy the man she loved while he was fighting for his life. Mom stepped forward and took Carmen's hands in hers. "Carmen, we're here because we love him too. That doesn't mean we're not hurt or angry, but we're not here to cause him more pain." The gentleness in Mom's voice surprised me. Patricia Thompson had every right to be furious. Her ex-husband had been living a lie that affected their children and grandchildren for nearly 2 decades. But she'd apparently decided that Dad's hospital room wasn't the place for reckoning. Nicole finally spoke up, her voice thick with guilt. "Carmen, maybe I should wait outside. I'm the one who convinced him to tell them today. If seeing me upsets him." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself. "You're part of this family, Nicole. Whatever else has happened, you're still my sister, and you've been taking care of Dad when he couldn't take care of himself. We go in together." Carmen nodded gratefully and pushed open the door to reveal Dad's room. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing David Thompson, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who'd held Tyler and Chloe as newborns, connected to monitors and machines, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever imagined possible. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as we filed into the room. The moment he saw all of us together, his face crumpled with an expression of relief and terror so profound that I felt my anger begin to dissolve, despite my best efforts to hold on to it. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier. "You came." "Of course I came, Dad. You're in the hospital." His gaze moved from me to Mom, and I watched decades of history pass between them in a single look. "Patty, I'm so sorry for everything." Mom moved to the chair beside his bed with the efficiency of someone who'd sat vigil before. "David Thompson, you are the most stubborn, complicated man I've ever known. But we can discuss that later. Right now you need to focus on getting better." Dad's eyes found Miguel and Sophia, and his entire demeanor changed. The guilt and fear were replaced by pure parental love, the same expression I'd seen on his face countless times when Nicole and I were young. "Did you kids eat dinner?" "Carmen, please tell me you didn't spend Thanksgiving in this horrible place." Sophia moved to the other side of his bed and took his hand. "We had dinner with Rachel, Dad. She makes really good stuffing, just like you always said." The simple statement hit Dad like a physical blow. "You had dinner together, all of you?" Carmen sat on the edge of the bed carefully, avoiding the various wires and tubes. "David, they know everything. Nicole brought us to Rachel's house, and we told them about us, about Miguel and Sophia, about the support you've been giving us." I watched Dad process this information, his face cycling through disbelief, relief, and terror. "Rachel, I never wanted you to find out this way. I was going to tell you, I swear I was, but I kept waiting for the right time, and then there never seemed to be one." 17 years, Dad. You waited 17 years for the right time." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and I saw him flinch. But I needed answers, and this sterile hospital room with its constant beeping monitors felt like the only place where complete honesty was possible. "Tell me how it started. Help me understand how you went from volunteering at a community center to having a secret family." Dad closed his eyes for a long moment, gathering strength or courage or both. When he opened them, he looked directly at me with the same earnestness I remembered from childhood conversations about right and wrong. "After your mother and I divorced, I was lost. I'd failed at the most important relationship of my life, and I was only seeing you girls every other weekend. I started volunteering at the Bridgeport Community Center because I needed purpose, something to fill the empty hours." Carmen squeezed his hand gently. "I was leading a support group for single parents. I'd just left my ex-husband, and I was struggling to raise Miguel as a baby while working full-time. David started helping with the child care during our meetings. It wasn't romantic at first, Dad continued, his voice getting stronger as he talked. Carmen needed help, and I needed to feel useful. I started watching Miguel while she worked extra shifts, helping with groceries when money was tight. He was just a baby, but he was so smart, so curious about everything. I could see the love in Dad's eyes as he talked about Miguel's early years, the same pride I remembered him showing when describing Nicole's and my achievements. It was disorienting to realize that while I was in college, completely unaware, Dad was learning to love another child with the same devotion he'd shown us. When did it become more than helping? Mom asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice, rather than accusation. Carmen answered. Miguel was about 2 when I realized I was falling in love with David. We'd been friends for almost 3 years, and he'd become such an important part of our lives. But I knew he was still processing his divorce, still figuring out his relationship with Rachel and Nicole. I fought it, Dad said firmly. I knew getting involved with Carmen would complicate everything. But Miguel had started calling me Papa, and Carmen was the kindest, most generous woman I'd ever met. When she told me she was pregnant with Sophia, I knew I couldn't walk away. The timeline was becoming clearer, and with it the impossible choices Dad had faced. Sophia's birth would have coincided with my junior year of college, when I was completely absorbed in my studies and social life. Nicole would have been in high school, dealing with typical teenage problems. From Dad's perspective, we probably seemed like we didn't need him as much as this struggling young mother and her children did. Miguel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dad, maybe you should rest. This is a lot of talking for someone who just had heart surgery. But Dad shook his head stubbornly. No, Miguel, I've been quiet about this for too long. Rachel deserves to understand the choices I made, even if she can't forgive them. He turned back to me, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a determination I recognized from every difficult conversation we'd ever had. Rachel, I never meant to choose them over you and Nicole. I was trying to be there for everyone, but I realize now that I failed everyone instead. You girls needed a father who was present and honest, not one who was constantly distracted by secrets. And Carmen and the kids deserved a man who could be proud of his family, not someone who made them feel like a shameful secret. The raw honesty in his words broke something loose inside me. For 17 years, I'd been seeing Dad's distraction and emotional distance as personal rejection, never imagining that he was struggling with an impossible situation of his own making. But Nicole knew, I said, looking at my sister who'd been silent since we entered the room. Nicole knew for 3 years, and she watched me worry about you, watched me offer to help with your finances, and she never said anything. Nicole looked up with tears streaming down her face. Rachel, when I found out about Carmen and the kids, Dad made me swear not to tell you. He was convinced that if you knew the truth, you'd feel obligated to help support them, and he couldn't live with that guilt. So instead you took on that burden yourself. It wasn't a burden, Nicole said fiercely. Miguel and Sophia are amazing kids. Carmen is like the mother I always wished I'd had after the divorce, warm and nurturing and completely devoted to her family. Once I met them, I couldn't stand the thought of them losing their home, or Dad dying from stress, because he was too proud to ask for help. Dad struggled to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. Nicole risked her own financial security to help us. She took out loans, worked extra clients, never took a vacation, and she did it all while begging me to tell you the truth. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been living comfortably with Kevin, building our savings account and planning our children's college funds, my sister had been quietly sacrificing to hold together a family I didn't even know existed. Sophia spoke up with the directness that seemed to be her trademark. Rachel, your sister is the reason Miguel got to stay in his advanced classes, and I could keep taking art lessons. Without Nicole's help, Dad would have had to choose between his medical care and our education. The weight of Nicole's sacrifice was overwhelming, but it also raised painful questions about family loyalty and the decisions we make when faced with impossible choices. Nicole, I said carefully, I understand why you helped Dad and Carmen. But what I don't understand is how you could sit at my dinner table for 3 years, watching me worry about Dad's health and finances, and never tell me that I had a brother and sister I'd never met. Nicole wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, because every time I tried to bring it up, Dad would have another panic attack. The cardiologist said stress was his biggest risk factor, and knowing how guilty he felt about keeping this secret was literally killing him. Carmen looked between Nicole and me with the expression of someone who'd been caught in the middle of family dynamics she didn't fully understand. Maybe I should explain my part in this, she said quietly. When Nicole first discovered David's relationship with us, I told her she should encourage him to tell you immediately. I never wanted to be the reason David was estranged from his daughters. Then why didn't you? I asked, not unkindly, but needing to understand. Because David was terrified that you'd hate him. And honestly, because I was terrified too. Rachel, you and Nicole are successful, educated women with stable lives. I'm a single mother who works as a home health aide and cleans offices at night. I was afraid you'd think I was some kind of gold digger who trapped your father. The vulnerability in Carmen's voice made me see her clearly for the first time since she'd appeared on my doorstep. She wasn't a homewrecker or a manipulator. She was a woman who'd fallen in love with a man who came with complicated family dynamics, and she'd spent 17 years feeling like she had to justify her existence. Carmen, I said, meeting her eyes directly, I don't think you're a gold digger. From everything I've learned today, you've been supporting yourself and your kids while Dad struggled to help. If anything, you've been taking care of him. Dad's monitors beeped more rapidly as his emotional state fluctuated. Rachel, please don't blame Carmen for any of this. Every choice that led to this situation was mine. I fell in love when I thought I was too old for that kind of complication. I had children when I thought my parenting days were over. And I was too much of a coward to figure out how to blend my families instead of hiding one from the other. Mom, who'd been listening to this entire exchange with the patience of someone accustomed to family drama, finally spoke up. David, you were trying to protect everyone, but you ended up hurting everyone instead. Rachel and Nicole spent years thinking you were pulling away from them. Carmen and the kids spent years feeling like a shameful secret. And you nearly killed yourself trying to be everything to everyone while being honest with no one. The truth of Mom's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Dad had created this situation through a series of choices that seemed reasonable in isolation, but had compounded into an unsustainable web of deception. A nurse appeared in the doorway, clearly concerned about the number of visitors and Dad's elevated vitals. I'm sorry, but Mr. Thompson needs rest. The surgery was just yesterday, and too much stimulation can interfere with his recovery. Carmen stood immediately. Of course, David, we should go and let you sleep. But Dad gripped her hand tightly. Don't go, please. I've spent 17 years being afraid that my two families would destroy each other if they ever met. Now that you're all here together, I can't bear the thought of you leaving separately. I looked around the room at this complicated group of people who'd somehow become my family through a series of secrets and revelations I was still processing. Miguel and Sofia, these brave teenagers who'd handled their father's medical crisis with more maturity than many adults. Carmen, this kind woman who'd loved Dad, despite the impossible situation he'd created. Nicole, my sister, who'd sacrificed her own security to protect a family she felt responsible for. And Dad, the man who'd tried so hard to avoid hurting anyone that he'd ended up hurting everyone. We're not leaving separately. I said finally, we're family now, all of us. Complicated, messy family, but family nonetheless. The relief on Dad's face was immediate and profound. For the first time since we'd arrived, his breathing seemed to ease and his grip on Carmen's hand relaxed. But as I made that commitment to treat Miguel and Sofia as my siblings and Carmen as part of our family, I realized that words were easier than actions. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when we had to figure out how to integrate our lives in practical ways. The nurse cleared her throat meaningfully, and we began the process of saying goodnight. But as we prepared to leave Dad's hospital room, I knew that tomorrow would bring conversations about custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, and holiday schedules. The revelation phase of this family crisis was ending, but the reconstruction phase was just beginning. The drive back to Millbrook that night was heavy with the weight of unspoken agreements and the reality of what we'd all just committed to. Carmen sat in the passenger seat of my car, staring out the window at the passing streetlights, while Miguel and Sofia dozed in the back seat with the exhaustion that comes after emotional upheaval. Behind us, Nicole followed in her Honda with Mom, who'd insisted on riding with her to have a talk about the choices she'd made over the past 3 years. When we pulled into my driveway, Kevin was waiting on the porch with the kind of patient expression that told me he'd spent the evening processing the day's revelations and preparing for whatever came next. Through the living room window, I could see Tyler and Chloe sprawled on the couch, fast asleep in front of the television, their faces peaceful in the way only children can manage after a day of unexpected excitement. "The guest room is ready," Kevin said quietly, as we approached the house. I figured Carmen and the kids would need somewhere to stay tonight. I looked at Carmen, who'd been silent for most of the drive. "You don't have to go back to Bridgeport tonight. It's late, and you've been at the hospital for days." "We couldn't impose," Carmen began. But Sophia cut her off with teenage pragmatism. "Mom, we're exhausted, and the hospital is an hour away. If they're offering, we should stay." Miguel nodded his agreement. "Besides, shouldn't we talk about what happens next? Dad's going to be in the hospital for at least a week, and we can't keep missing school to sit in waiting rooms." The practical reality of blending our families hit me with sudden force. Miguel and Sophia had lives in Bridgeport, schools, friends, routines that had nothing to do with our suburban Connecticut existence. Carmen had 2 jobs that she couldn't afford to lose while Dad recovered. And yet, Dad's medical crisis had thrust us all together in a way that demanded immediate decisions about custody, care, and responsibility. Nicole and Mom joined us on the porch, and I could see from Mom's expression that their car ride conversation had been intense. Nicole's eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a different quality to her guilt now, as if some burden had been lifted by finally having everything in the open. "We need to talk," Mom announced, with the authority she'd wielded during our teenage years, when family meetings were called for crisis management. "All of us, together. These children need stability. Carmen needs support, and David needs to focus on recovering, without worrying about how everyone else is managing." Kevin opened the front door and gestured us all inside. The house still smelled like Thanksgiving dinner, a comforting backdrop to the uncomfortable conversations ahead. Carmen and the kids settled onto the living room couch, while the rest of us found chairs, creating an awkward circle that felt like a therapy session or a business meeting. "Let's start with the immediate concerns," Mom said, taking charge, as she always did in family crises. "Carmen, what's your work situation? Can you take time off to be with David, or do you need to get back to Bridgeport?" Carmen shifted uncomfortably. "I work for a home health agency, so my schedule is somewhat flexible. But I can't afford to miss too many shifts, especially now with David's medical bills. And the kids need to be in school. Miguel has exams next week, and Sophia has an art project due." The weight of financial pressure was evident in every line of Carmen's body. She'd been carrying the stress of Dad's health crisis while trying to maintain the income that supported her children, all while navigating the emotional complexity of meeting his other family for the first time. Nicole spoke up hesitantly. "I could drive the kids back and forth to school. My client meetings are mostly in Hartford anyway, so swinging by Bridgeport isn't a huge detour. That's a 40-minute drive each way," Kevin pointed out. "Twice a day, every day. It's not sustainable long-term." Miguel looked between the adults, with the expression of someone older than his 16 years. "What if Sophia and I stayed here during the week, and went home to Bridgeport on weekends? That way Mom could focus on Dad, and we wouldn't miss school." The suggestion hung in the air, while everyone processed its implications. Miguel and Sophia, living in my house, becoming part of Tyler and Chloe's daily routine, sharing meals and homework time, and the 1,000 small interactions that create family bonds. Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Tyler already showed me his room, and he said there's a pull-out bed in the study, where Miguel could sleep. And Chloe wants to share her art supplies with me." The ease with which my children had accepted their new siblings was both heartwarming and slightly overwhelming. Tyler and Chloe had spent the evening treating Miguel and Sophia like long-lost cousins, showing them video games and explaining family inside jokes, without any of the adult complications about loyalty and betrayal. "It would just be temporary," Carmen added quickly, "until David recovers, and we can figure out a more permanent arrangement." But even as she said it, we all knew that nothing about this situation was temporary. Dad's heart attack had forced us past the point of maintaining separate lives. Whatever arrangement we created now would become the foundation for how our blended family functioned going forward. Mom looked at me with the questioning expression I remembered from childhood decisions that would affect the whole family. "Rachel, this is your home. You and Kevin need to decide what you're comfortable with. I glanced at Kevin, who gave me the slight nod that meant he was thinking the same thing I was. Our house had always been the gathering place for holidays and family events. Adding two more teenagers to the mix wouldn't fundamentally change the chaos we were already accustomed to managing. Miguel and Sophia are welcome here for as long as they need, I said, surprising myself with how natural the words felt. But we need to talk about the practical stuff. School districts, medical care, what happens when Dad gets discharged. Nicole pulled out her phone and started typing notes. I can handle the school district paperwork for temporary enrollment. And Dad's insurance should cover the kids' medical needs, but I'll need to check with Carmen about existing doctors and prescriptions. The conversation was taking on the business-like efficiency that our family had always used to manage logistics, but underneath the practical planning, I could sense the emotional undercurrents that would need addressing. Tyler and Chloe were excited about their new siblings, but they'd also need help processing the fact that their grandfather had kept such a significant secret. Miguel and Sophia were being incredibly mature about the situation, but they were still teenagers dealing with their father's life-threatening illness while being integrated into a family they'd only just met. Carmen stood up suddenly, overwhelmed by the rapid planning happening around her. This is too much. You all just found out we existed this morning, and now you're rearranging your lives to take care of us. I never wanted David's relationship with his daughters to become about obligation or duty. The vulnerability in her voice stopped all our planning cold. Mom got up and guided Carmen back to the couch, sitting beside her with the maternal instinct that had never dimmed despite her own divorce disappointments. Carmen dear, this isn't about obligation, it's about family choosing to take care of family. You've been part of David's life for 17 years, which makes you part of our lives whether we knew it or not. Besides, Nicole added with a watery smile, you've been taking care of Dad better than any of us have for the past few years. If anything, we owe you. Miguel looked around the room at all of us with the serious expression that seemed to be his default. We're not charity cases. Sophia and I are good students, we help with chores, and Mom works hard to support us. We're not looking for anyone to rescue us. His pride was evident, and I recognized Dad's stubborn independence and his teenage son's fierce determination to prove their worth. But I also saw the exhaustion in both kids' faces, the strain of trying to be strong while their father fought for his life in a hospital bed. Miguel, I said gently, nobody thinks you're charity cases. You're our family, and families help each other. When Tyler broke his arm last year, Mom and Nicole both dropped everything to help us manage. When Nicole's condo flooded, she lived here for 3 weeks while insurance sorted out the repairs. This is what we do. Sophia curled up next to her mother, her 14-year-old bravado finally cracking. I just want Dad to be okay. I don't care where we live or what school I go to, as long as he gets better. The simple honesty of her statement reminded us all why we were really here. Beneath the complex logistics of blending families was the fundamental fear that Dad might not recover, that these children might lose their father while still adjusting to the existence of his other family. Kevin, who'd been quietly observing the family dynamics, finally spoke up. Why don't we focus on this week? Miguel and Sophia can stay here while Carmen spends time at the hospital with David. We'll handle school and homework and normal kid stuff. Everything else we can figure out as we go. The relief on Carmen's face was immediate and profound. For the first time since arriving at my house that afternoon, she looked like she might actually be able to breathe. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Mom said with the tone that indicated she'd been saving the most important topic for last. Finances. David's medical bills are going to be substantial, and Carmen can't afford to lose income while he recovers. Nicole's been shouldering this burden alone for 3 years, but that's not sustainable either. Nicole started to protest, but Mom held up her hand. Nicole, you've done more than enough. It's time for the rest of us to contribute. The conversation that followed was awkward in the way that money discussions always are among family members with different financial situations. But it was also necessary. Dad's heart attack had created immediate expenses beyond his normal support of Carmen and the kids. Hospital bills, extended recovery time, potential changes to his pension, all factors that would affect everyone's financial stability. Kevin and I committed to covering Miguel and Sophia's school expenses and daily needs while they stayed with us. Mom offered to take over Dad's mortgage payments temporarily, having maintained better retirement savings than Dad despite their divorce. Nicole would continue managing the medical bills and insurance coordination, using her real estate connections to navigate the healthcare bureaucracy. Carmen protested that she couldn't accept so much help, but Miguel surprised everyone by taking charge of the conversation with adult-level directness. "Mom, you've been working yourself to death trying to manage everything alone. Dad's been stressed about money for years, and that stress contributed to his heart attack. If everyone's willing to help, we should let them." The wisdom in his words was startling, and I found myself wondering how much of Dad's financial anxiety these kids had absorbed over the years. They'd grown up knowing that their existence created hardship for the man they loved, and that knowledge had forced them to mature faster than children should have to. As the evening wound down and we all prepared for bed, the practical arrangements began to feel real. Carmen would sleep in our guest room while Miguel took the pull-out bed in Kevin's study, and Sophia shared Chloe's room with the enthusiasm of two girls excited about an extended sleepover. But as I helped Carmen settle into the guest room and gather extra pillows for the kids, I realized that the easy part was over. We'd managed the crisis, handled the logistics, and created temporary solutions for immediate problems. The hard part would be navigating the emotional complexities of being a blended family, when half of us were still processing the betrayal and secrets that had brought us together. "Rachel," Carmen said quietly as I was about to leave her room, "thank you for welcoming us into your home. I know this can't be easy for you." I paused in the doorway, thinking about everything that had changed in the span of one Thanksgiving day. "Carmen, I won't pretend this isn't complicated. I'm still hurt about the secrets, and I'm still figuring out how I feel about everything Dad did. But Miguel and Sophia are amazing kids, and they're my siblings. That means something." As I headed to my own bedroom, I could hear the quiet conversations happening throughout the house. Kevin explaining the morning routine to Miguel. Sophia and Chloe whispering excitedly about shared interests. Nicole calling to check on Dad's condition one more time before visiting hours ended. The house felt different with 5 extra people in it, but it also felt more complete somehow, as if we'd been missing pieces of ourselves without knowing it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we figured out how to function as an expanded family, but tonight, for the first time in years, everyone David Thompson loved was finally under the same roof. 3 months later, the Thompson family chaos had settled into something resembling normal, though our definition of normal had expanded considerably since that life-changing Thanksgiving day. Miguel's textbooks were scattered across my kitchen counter next to Tyler's baseball equipment, while Sophia's art projects competed for refrigerator space with Chloe's dance recital photos. The sounds of 4 children navigating homework, sibling arguments, and shared video games had become the soundtrack of our evenings. Dad had been discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks, but his recovery had been slower than anyone anticipated. The heart attack had been more severe than initially thought, requiring additional procedures and an extended rehabilitation period that left him weak and dependent on others for the first time in his adult life. Carmen had taken a leave of absence from one of her jobs to manage his care, while the rest of us had reorganized our lives to support them both. The arrangement that was supposed to be temporary had gradually become permanent as Miguel and Sophia integrated into our household with remarkable ease. They'd enrolled in the local high school and middle school, where Miguel quickly established himself as a star student in advanced mathematics, while Sophia found her place in the art program. Their adaptation had been so smooth that it sometimes felt like they'd always been part of our family. But the real transformation hadn't happened in our daily routines. It had happened in the relationships between us all, particularly between Nicole and me. The sister who I'd felt betrayed by had become my closest ally in managing our expanded family, and I'd come to understand that her choices over the past 3 years had been motivated by love rather than deception. The morning everything truly changed started like any other school day. I was making breakfast for 4 children instead of 2, while Kevin managed the complex logistics of getting everyone to their respective schools on time. Carmen had spent the night at Dad's house, helping him navigate a particularly difficult day in his recovery, and Miguel and Sophia moved through our morning routine with the comfortable familiarity of permanent residents. It was Sophia who brought me the envelope that would shift our family dynamic once again. She'd been checking the mail, a chore she'd volunteered for with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoyed small responsibilities, when she found the official-looking document addressed to Carmen Rodriguez, care of Rachel Thompson. "Rachel, this came for my mom," Sophia said, holding out an envelope from Hartford Family Court. "It looks important." My stomach dropped as I recognized the return address. Family court correspondence usually meant custody issues, divorce proceedings, or other legal complications that could threaten the stability we'd worked so hard to build. I called Carmen immediately, my voice tight with worry. Carmen, there's a legal document here for you. Should I open it or do you want to come over? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was shaky. I know what it is, Rachel. Miguel's biological father is trying to get custody. He found out about David's heart attack and thinks this is his opportunity to claim Miguel. The words hit me like a physical blow. In all our discussions about blending families and managing Dad's recovery, none of us had considered the possibility that Carmen's ex-husband might resurface to complicate our already complex situation. I'll be right there, Carmen continued. Don't let Miguel see the envelope. I need to talk to him myself. As I hung up the phone, Miguel appeared in the kitchen doorway with his backpack slung over his shoulder ready for school. At 16, he'd grown into a thoughtful young man who carried himself with quiet dignity, but I could see the concern in his eyes as he noticed my expression. Is everything okay with Dad? Do we need to go to the hospital? Dad's fine, I assured him quickly, but your mom is coming over. There's something she needs to discuss with you. Sophia joined her brother, her artistic intuition picking up on the tension in the room. What kind of something? You look worried. Before I could answer, Nicole arrived for her usual morning coffee stop, a routine she'd established to help coordinate our family schedules. She took one look at my face and immediately shifted into crisis management mode. What's wrong? Is it Dad? I showed her the envelope, and her expression darkened immediately. Nicole had been present for some of Carmen's stories about her abusive first marriage, and she understood the threat this legal action represented better than I did. Miguel doesn't know his biological father is trying to contact him, Nicole said quietly, glancing toward the kids who were gathering their school supplies. Carmen's been protecting him from that man for his entire life. The complexity of the situation became clear as Carmen arrived 20 minutes later, her face pale with stress and exhaustion. She'd been managing Dad's care while working reduced hours and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life for her children. The last thing she needed was a custody battle with a man who'd never shown interest in being a father. Carmen gathered Miguel and Sophia in the living room, while the rest of us tried to give them privacy while remaining close enough to offer support. Through the partially open door, I could hear Carmen's calm voice explaining that Miguel's biological father had learned about their current living situation and was claiming he wanted to establish a relationship. Miguel's response was immediate and firm. I don't want a relationship with him, Mom. David is my father. He's been my father since I was 2 years old. I know, sweetie, but legally it's not that simple. Your biological father has rights, even though he's never exercised them before. Sophia's voice carried the indignation that only teenage girls can muster. This is so unfair. Where has he been for the past 14 years? Why does he get to show up now and mess up our family? The pain in her voice was heartbreaking, and I realized that this legal challenge threatened not just Miguel's stability, but Sophia's sense of security as well. Dad's heart attack had already disrupted their world, and now their biological father's reappearance threatened to tear apart the blended family we'd all worked so hard to build. Kevin, who'd been listening from the kitchen, joined me in the hallway, with the expression he wore when preparing to solve a complicated problem. Rachel, this family court document, it's just a notice of intent to file for custody. He hasn't actually filed anything yet. What does that mean? It means Carmen has options. She can respond proactively instead of just reacting to whatever he decides to do. Nicole appeared beside us, her phone already in her hand. I'm calling my lawyer. Janet Patterson handles family law, and she's excellent with custody cases involving complicated family dynamics. As the adults mobilized to protect Miguel and Sophia, I watched through the living room doorway as the two kids comforted each other with the resilience they'd developed through years of uncertainty. Miguel had his arm around Sophia's shoulders, speaking to her in the gentle tone I'd often heard Dad use when one of us was upset. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Miguel was telling his sister, we have Dad, and we have Rachel and Kevin and Nicole. We have a family now, a real family that chooses to love us. The wisdom in his words was staggering, and I realized that these children had developed emotional intelligence far beyond their years through necessity. They'd learned to adapt, to appreciate stability when they found it, and to fight for the people who truly loved them. Carmen emerged from the living room with red-rimmed eyes, but a determined expression. I need to tell you all something about Miguel's biological father. He's not just absent, he's dangerous. That's why I left when Miguel was a baby. That's why we moved to Connecticut. That's why I was so grateful when David became part of our lives. The revelation added a new dimension of urgency to the situation. This wasn't just a custody dispute, it was a safety issue that could threaten not just Miguel, but our entire family's well-being. Mom, who'd arrived during the family conference, listened to Carmen's explanation with the focused attention she'd always given to serious problems. Carmen, do you have documentation of the abuse? Police reports, medical records, anything that would support your position in court? Some, but it was 16 years ago. I was young and scared, and I didn't know how to properly document everything that was happening. Nicole looked up from her phone conversation with the lawyer. Janet wants to see Carmen immediately. She says time is critical in these situations, and there are protective measures we can put in place if we act quickly. The next several hours passed in a blur of legal consultations, document gathering, and strategic planning. Janet Patterson turned out to be a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who understood both the legal complexities and the emotional stakes of our situation. After reviewing Carmen's limited documentation and interviewing both Miguel and Sofia, she outlined a multi-pronged approach to protecting our family. The good news is that Miguel is 16, which means his preference carries significant weight in custody decisions. The fact that he's been living with David Thompson as his father figure for 14 years, combined with his biological father's complete absence during that time, gives us strong grounds to fight any custody claim. What about the bad news? Carmen asked, her voice tight with anxiety. The bad news is that your ex-husband's timing is strategic. David's health crisis could be portrayed as instability in Miguel's current living situation. We need to demonstrate that Miguel has a strong, stable support system that extends beyond David alone. I found myself speaking before I'd fully thought through the implications. Miguel and Sofia both live with Kevin and me now. They're enrolled in our local schools, they have established relationships with our children, and they're part of our family structure. Janet nodded approvingly. That helps significantly. But we can strengthen your position even further. She paused, looking around the room at our assembled family. Carmen, Nicole, Mom, Kevin and me, with Miguel and Sofia, listening intently from the couch. I'd recommend that David formally adopt both Miguel and Sofia, assuming that's something everyone wants. Given their ages and the length of their relationship, it should be a straightforward process. Once David is their legal father, their biological father's claim becomes much weaker. The suggestion hung in the air, while everyone processed its implications. Formal adoption would make official what had been true emotionally for years, that Dad was Miguel and Sofia's father in every way that mattered. Miguel stood up from the couch with the quiet dignity that had impressed me since the day I met him. I would like that very much. David Thompson has been more of a father to me than my biological father ever was, or ever could be. Sofia nodded enthusiastically. And it would make us officially Rachel and Nicole's siblings, right? Not just half-siblings, but real siblings. The innocence in her question brought tears to my eyes. In all our discussions about family dynamics and legal relationships, I'd forgotten that the children might be uncertain about their place in our expanded family structure. Sofia, I said, moving to sit beside her on the couch, you and Miguel have been our real siblings since the day we met you. The legal paperwork just makes it official. Nicole joined us, taking Sofia's other hand. We're the Thompson family, all of us. That's not changing, no matter what your biological father tries to do. Carmen was crying now, overwhelmed by the support surrounding her children, and the possibility of finally making their family bonds legally secure. David would want this more than anything. He's been saying for years that Miguel and Sofia are his children in his heart, even if not legally. Janet began outlining the adoption process, while simultaneously filing protective orders to prevent Miguel's biological father from making any custody claims while the adoption proceeded. The legal machinery that had seemed so threatening that morning was now working to protect our family rather than tear it apart. 3 weeks later, we were all assembled in Dad's living room for a very different kind of family gathering. Dad had recovered enough to participate actively in the adoption proceedings, and his joy at finally making his relationship with Miguel and Sofia official was evident despite his continued physical frailness. Miguel's biological father had withdrawn his custody claim after learning about the adoption proceedings and facing the prospect of legal fees he couldn't afford. More importantly, he'd been served with the protective orders documenting his history of domestic violence, making it clear that any future attempts to contact the family would result in serious legal consequences. I have something to say to all of you, Dad announced as we gathered around his dining room table, the same table where he'd shared countless meals with Carmen and the kids over the years. This heart attack was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it led to the best thing that ever happened to our family. He looked around the room at all of us: Carmen, Miguel, Sophia, Nicole, Mom, Kevin, Tyler, Chloe, and me, and his eyes filled with tears. For 17 years, I lived in fear that my two families would destroy each other if they ever met. Instead, you all came together to save each other. Miguel and Sophia gained sisters and grandparents and cousins. Rachel and Nicole gained siblings who brought out the best in them. And Carmen gained the family support she'd been missing since she was 18 years old. Miguel, who'd been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Dad, you didn't just give us a family. You showed us what it means to love people even when it's complicated, even when it's scary, even when you don't know how everything will work out. The wisdom in his words captured something essential about our journey as a family. Love hadn't solved all our problems, or erased the pain of Dad's deception, but it had given us the foundation to build something stronger and more honest than what we'd had before. Sophia, not to be outdone by her brother's eloquence, added her own perspective with typical teenage directness. Plus, now I have two older sisters to give me advice about boys and college and stuff. That's pretty cool. The laughter that filled Dad's living room was different from the laughter we'd shared before the crisis, deeper, more genuine, tinged with the knowledge that we'd all survived something difficult together and emerged stronger. As the evening wound down, and we began the familiar process of coordinating school pickups and work schedules, I realized that our family had achieved something remarkable. We'd taken a devastating betrayal and transformed it into an opportunity for growth and healing. The secrets that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately brought us closer together. Nicole and I were loading dishes into Dad's dishwasher when she turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were children. Rachel, I need you to know that these past few months, working together to take care of everyone, it's reminded me why you were always my best friend before you were my sister. The simple statement captured something I'd been feeling, but hadn't known how to express. The crisis had stripped away years of adult complications and reminded us of the essential bond we'd shared since childhood. Nicole, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't hurt by the secrets, but I understand now that you were trying to protect everyone, including me. And watching you sacrifice so much for Miguel and Sophia made me proud to be your sister. As we finished cleaning up and prepared to head home to our respective households, Carmen pulled me aside for a private conversation. Rachel, I know this situation hasn't been easy for you. Finding out about us, having your whole family structure change overnight, taking on responsibility for my children. I want you to know that Miguel and Sophia are better people because of your influence. Carmen, they were already amazing kids. If anything, they've made our family better. There's something else, she continued, reaching into her purse to pull out a small wrapped package. Sophia wanted me to give this to you. Inside the package was a small framed drawing Sophia had made of our entire extended family gathered around my Thanksgiving table. The artistic detail was remarkable, but what took my breath away was the way she'd captured the love and connection between all of us, even in the midst of what had been a day of shocking revelations. At the bottom of the drawing, Sophia had written in her careful script, "The Thompson family, finally complete." 6 months after that transformative Thanksgiving, our blended family had developed its own rhythms and traditions. Dad's health had improved dramatically once the stress of maintaining his double life had been eliminated. Carmen had returned to full-time work with the confidence that came from having a support system. Miguel and Sophia had thrived in their new schools and formed deep friendships while maintaining their strong relationship with Dad. But perhaps most importantly, we'd all learned that family isn't just about blood relationships or legal documents. It's about choosing to love and support each other through whatever challenges life presents. The betrayal that had brought us together had ultimately taught us that honesty, even when it's painful, creates stronger bonds than secrets ever could. The last time we were all together was for Miguel's high school graduation. As I watched him walk across the stage to receive his diploma, I thought about the scared 16-year-old who'd stood on my doorstep that Thanksgiving day, uncertain about his place in a family he'd never known existed. Now he was headed to college on a full scholarship, surrounded by a network of people who believed in his potential and would support him no matter what challenges he faced. Dad sat in the front row, wearing the proud expression I remembered from my own graduation, while Carmen beamed with the satisfaction of a mother who'd successfully raised an exceptional young man, despite enormous obstacles. After the ceremony, as our extended family gathered for the traditional graduation dinner, Miguel stood up to make a toast that surprised us all with its emotional depth. A year and a half ago, I thought family was just my mom and Sophia and Dad. I thought that was enough, and it was. But then I learned that family could be bigger and more complicated and more wonderful than I'd ever imagined. I learned that sometimes the best things come from the hardest moments, and that love multiplies when you share it instead of hiding it. He raised his glass and looked around the table at all of us. To the Thompson family, all of us, for teaching me that the truth might be scary, but it's always worth it. As we all raised our glasses in response, I caught Dad's eye across the table. The man who'd spent 17 years living in fear of bringing his families together was now surrounded by the love and acceptance he'd always craved, but never thought he deserved. The betrayal that had shattered our family's foundation had ultimately allowed us to rebuild it stronger than before. And as I looked around the table at our complicated, wonderful, honest family, I knew that this was exactly where we all belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.